Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by Democratic candidate for District Attorney Eliza Orlins. Eliza will be facing up against current District Attorney Cyrus Vance, a Democrat, in next year's primary. Eliza, how are you doing?
I'm okay. We are living through some wild, wild times. 2020 has been pretty crazy so far, but I am okay. How about you?
I'm doing well. I can't complain. I've got my health and my mental faculties, and everything else is sort of just a nice to have after that. But I was hoping I could ask you some questions about why you decided to run and get your take on some of the current events that have been happening. How does that sound?
Great.
Perfect. So according to your website, you worked as a public defender in Manhattan for at least 10 years. What made you choose that as a career path, and how did your time as a public defender eventually evolve into wanting to run for district attorney?
So I went to law school knowing I wanted to be a public defender. It was the only reason I went to law school. It was the only job I applied for after I graduated. It was it's one of those things that just feels like a calling. And I remember when I was an intern in college at the public defender's office here in Manhattan, and being in court and meeting our clients and just seeing the way that they were treated and watching the cruel, unjust criminal legal system operate, I realized I just desperately wanted to help people and I wanted to fight for justice. And so I desperately wanted to be a public defender. And I thought that I would do it forever. Perfectly honestly, I really anticipated being a public defender for life. But after, over a decade of kind of fighting against this system and watching this system that operates in a way that marginalizes and disenfranchises, people of color, people who are LGBTQIA, people from, with disabilities, and people who, just get up and go to work every day and try to use their paycheck to feed their families, and watching how instead it just disproportionately favored the rich, powerful, wealthy, well-connected. And I realized, people who say the criminal justice system is broken, it's not true. It's not broken. This is how it was designed to operate. And so I realized that I wouldn't be able to change the system as a public defender, and that we can't change the system unless we change the DA. And so that's what kind of pushed me to run for Manhattan District Attorney.
So if you do win, it would actually make you the first female district attorney in Manhattan history, dating back to 1801. Has wanting to break that cycle of only men holding the office factored into your decision to run at all?
I think it's far past time for a woman to be Manhattan District Attorney. I mean, right now we're seeing across the country more than 50% of law students are women. We're seeing women as DAs in other places, and the fact that it hasn't happened yet in Manhattan is really something that needs to change, and women need to be represented. And I think that that's certainly, it would be an honor to be the first woman Manhattan District Attorney.
So the current district attorney, Cyrus Vance, has built up somewhat of a reputation as someone who's willing to politicize the office. For instance, in 2015, he failed to prosecute Harvey Weinstein for sexual abuse, and his office lobbied to have Jeffrey Epstein's sexual offender status reduced. Mm-hmm. And notably, both were high-profile donors to the Democratic Party. And on the other side, he dropped the ball on a slam dunk case against the Trump children for misleading the buyers of their Soho real estate development. So my question to you is, can you commit wholeheartedly to not playing politics with the office and prosecuting cases free of bias, even if it might come at the expense of a future election?
Of course, I am not for sale. My morals and ethics are steadfast. Unlike Cy Vance, who took donations from Weinstein and Epstein and the Trump kids' lawyers, that's just not something anyone would have to worry about with me. I would never be biased in cases that come before my office, and money will never influence the prosecutorial decisions I make. And in fact, I think that, everyone has to be held accountable for their actions, no matter whether or not they're wealthy and powerful and well-connected. And so I think that, if anyone thinks they can buy me, they're wasting their money. The same cannot be said for Cy Vance, though.
So something else I wanted to touch base on was the horrific death of George Floyd. So George Floyd was murdered at the hands of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, and that resulted in shaking the world awake to the injustices that are consistently levied against Black Americans by law enforcement, and it educated large swaths of people to the true meaning of the Black Lives Matter movement. Mm-hmm. Anyone who watched that video was touched personally. And so that's why I want to ask you, how did George Floyd's death touch you personally? And more importantly, how many George Floyds have you come across in your decade-long career as a public defender that probably should have sparked similar outrage, but didn't, simply because no one was there to record it on their cell phone?
I think that it's quite clear that the system is racist, that you know, when we think about the way in which police brutality and murder and targeting and violence occur, it's predominantly occurring against people of color and predominantly Black men. And I think that, you know, the George Floyd video was horrific. I mean, just one of the worst things to watch ever. And I don't see how anyone who saw it could not be affected by it. But it was not an aberration. It was not an accident. You know, to kneel on someone's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, you know, almost 3 minutes of that where the person was already unconscious, like that is intentional murder. And watching it was horrifying, but this has been going on for so long. I mean, there are just countless numbers of cases of names of people who we are, you know, out in the street chanting their names because these are people who were, you know, murdered at the hands of police. And I think it's not enough at this point for people to say, oh, well, I'm not racist, you know, unless you are working every day to dismantle these systems of oppression and racism and white supremacy in this country, you are not doing enough and you are complicit. And so, you know, I think that we were already like a powder keg about to explode. And you know, this was like the match that got struck that really has prompted all of these protests. And I have to say I'm heartened by them because I think that people are not going to stop, because I think that they are finally seeing that everyone is finally realizing the need for real systemic change.
So as district attorney, how would you make sure that your system works for everyone, more specifically those belonging to the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities?
Well, I mean, I think that first of all, it's hard to just undo, you know, hundreds of years of racism and white supremacy and these systems that prop those things up as one elected person. Like, it's so much bigger than that. But I do think there are things that the district attorney can specifically do to make sure that at least the Manhattan DA's office won't be perpetuating these systems that are so biased and racist. You know, cash bail is one of those things. Cash bail has been known to perpetuate the biased and racist nature of our criminal legal system. Because we say that people are innocent until proven guilty in this country, but really that only applies if you are rich. If you're wealthy enough to buy your freedom, then fine, you get to go home. But if you are a poor person, or if you are a person of color, you are far more likely to have bail set, maybe bail you cannot afford. So you lose your home, your job, you lose your children to foster care potentially. And everything you've worked for is taken from you because you're locked up on an accusation. Well, you know, we just need to end wealth-based detention, period. And I think, you know, that's one of the many things that I would do to make sure that people were treated equally and fairly.
So defund the police. It's a slogan that recently gained popularity, and to summarize, it basically means reallocating resources from police departments into other public service communities. Is this something you support? And if so, how would you use your position to aid in these reforms?
Well, so we spend billions of dollars, that's billions with a B, $6 billion on funding the NYPD here in New York City. And that means that's, you know, on surveillance, on punishment, on arrests, on all of these things, instead of investing in communities. in fostering, equitable and safe and healthy communities. And so for years, our country has criminalized addiction, criminalized poverty, incarcerated millions of people. And I think that has not provided public safety, that the way in which the police operate and the criminal legal system operates does not focus on perpetrators of real harm, yet it instead removes people who could be productive citizens, from the community. And we need to reallocate funds quite clearly. We need to be investing in supporting communities, in investing in people, in giving them services and focusing on marginalized communities. We need to put that money into social services, into, mental health treatment programs, into, homelessness, and fund schools and hospitals and libraries and all of these things that have been, they're the ones that have been defunded over the years. And in fact, these are the things that would actually keep us safe. By investing in communities and to create this systemic change, we have to focus government budgets on things that are beyond policing, that are essential towards achieving these goals. And so I think it's just, as Manhattan DA, I would be a force to for safety without fear and justice without overreach. And I think that this new vision is really what we need in New York, and especially these last few weeks have shown us that.
Definitely. So these last few weeks have led to some reforms. 50A, the New York law that basically prevented the release of individual police records to the public, has been repealed. Are there any other accountability measures that can be enacted to prevent the shielding of police officers from the consequences of their wrongdoing?
Well, there is so much that can be done. 50A was long past due to be repealed. And, Cy Vance, the Manhattan DA, has routinely shielded bad police officers from view, has known about officers who have had indictments dismissed because they've lied in front of a grand jury, have had hearings, found to be incredible under oath by judges because they've lied at hearings about how they stopped and searched someone, have had instances of misconduct. The city has paid out hundreds of millions of dollars because of these bad cops, and those people are still allowed to be the people who are the sole witnesses and the reason why someone gets locked up for years. So I, as DA, will not allow for that to happen. I think that there needs to be full transparency, and 50A doesn't go far enough. And so I think that there's also the element of holding police officers accountable. Police officers have not been held accountable, and they know they won't be held accountable for their actions. So they feel free to do whatever it is they want to do, with no repercussions. And I think I will no longer allow that to be the case. And so we will be able to, keep the public safe from these police officers.
That's a good transition to my next point. Because you're going to have to work so closely with law enforcement, which means you're also going to have to bump heads against the Police Benevolent Association. They are the largest and most powerful police union in New York, and they are actively against any progressive reforms. Knowing this, do you think that you'll still be able to do your job effectively with that presence sort of looming over everything you do? And if not, what's the recourse?
Well, of course I'll be able to do my job effectively, but the PBA has indeed been hostile to and resistant to any amount of reform, so much so that there's not really very much to be gained by attempting to manage their feelings as a city that, as we undertake the reforms that we need. And my job will be to work together with them, which of course I'll be able to do to keep the public safe. And where police officers fail to do that, endangering or terrorizing communities, the political power of police unions cannot be allowed to overrule the concerns about public safety. And I think it's worth noting that many real reforms reduce the role of police officers in our city. And I think that will make police officers' jobs easier, not harder. Even if the PBA wants to fight these reforms, the truth is they shouldn't be the people who are handling so many of these things. You know, we should get cops out of schools. They should not be people who are handling people in the throes of mental health crises. You know, there's so many things that we can think about that just should never have been the role of law enforcement to begin with. So I think that working together to you know, focus on perpetrators of real harm will be fine.
Lastly, I wanted to ask you, how would you use the DA's office to champion progressive reforms, such as bail reform?
Well, so I think that as DA, I will have the ability to not seek cash bail, to say, okay, this is a system that perpetuates, you know, bias, racism, and is unfair to people who don't have wealth. So I certainly can seek not to, I mean, I can promise not to seek cash bail, but it's also a huge bully pulpit. I mean, the Manhattan DA is, though it's a local election, it's a position that has so much power, and it's power that kind of emanates over the whole country, that people look to Manhattan and say, oh, well, if Manhattan is doing this and things are going well, we can also do that. Cities across America, you know, will take a cue from the Manhattan DA's office. And I think that the DA can be a leader, and as DA, I will be a leader in terms of criminal justice reform. And I will, you know, the Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, has not led on these issues. He's in fact been very resistant, despite running as a progressive, you know, almost 11 years ago. He certainly has not been that. And he is someone who has not led on closing Rikers and not building new jails. He's, you know, been regressive as it relates to discovery and bail reform. And I think that I, as DA, would foster a spirit of kind of transparency, accountability. You know, I would want my constituents to hold me accountable as well. Like, I would be very open about the data, about the cases that I prosecute and that I don't prosecute. And Vance does not do that. And I think that there's so many reforms that need to be undertaken. And as Manhattan DA, I would have, you know, a massive platform to do that.
Well, it was great talking to you. So without taking up any more of your day, I just want to say thank you for your time and good luck in next year's primary.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Bye.
Bye.